already have want to take the opportunity to welcome you, everybody, and to thank you for being here today on this second session of the seminars that we have established just this year. These seminars of webinars, really, within the Spanish Association for Crystallography and Crystal Growth, parts of the Spanish both chemistry and physics royal societies. So as some of you know, this is something that we were trying to do for quite a long time already, to get this series of seminars. Ideally, we wanted to have them down before in a physical format, not just virtual. But given the circumstances, actually, it's an opportunity to have here more researchers from other parts of Europe and everywhere to give this talk. So we are really happy. I was telling Christian before and thanking him before. We are really happy that we also have the chance to have him today in this second lecture. I know, and we are all very well aware, that many groups in Spain, and I notice also from the audience that there are people from other countries already also connected that that work on the field of metal organic frameworks and MOF chemistry. Many of us in the crystallographic group and from other groups in the Spanish Chemistry Society, it's a field that has been growing a lot during the past few years. And for all of us working in this field, it's a privilege to have Christian today here. So allow me just to do a short introduction, and then we can start with the talk. Christian is a CNRS research director. He's currently leading the Institute of Porous Materials from Paris. This is part of the École Normale Supérieure. Pardon my pronunciation.
No problem.
I just don't speak any French, so it's part of PSL University and CNRS J-Lab Laboratory. As I was saying, we all know Christian from many years. His work in MOF chemistry is very well known. He has a strong expertise on the synthesis and characterization of porous materials, of metal organic frameworks, and not just in the synthesis, but also in application of these materials in many fields related to health, but also environmental science. Christian has received many awards, such as the CNRS Bronze Medal. He also received a ERC grant and the Bedford Medal of French Academy of Science. So he has published a significant number of publications in many, over 350 in high impact papers, journals, and he's one of the highly cited scientists year after year. Which gives an idea of the relevance of his work. So again, thank you very much, Christian. And I think it's time if you want to start with this, with the presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Felipe, and thank you also to Victor and Pilar for the kind invitation to present some of our recent results in crystallochemistry of MOF. So today I've decided to select some of our work related to environmental catalysis in strong collaboration with groups of catalysis, including ITQ in Spain. So I was asked to give a short introduction of MOF, because there are probably people in the audience that are not very familiar with that, so I'll try to be very brief. So MOF are hybrid ordered solid. So you have metal cations, you have an organic ligand, and then of course you form porosity because you avoid the formation of the dense phase because of this organic spacer. And this is here one example of typical benchmark MOF called MI53, a trivalent base metal dicarboxylate solid. The ligand is a benzene dicarboxylate ligand. And then the inorganic part is a chains of corner sharing a metal octahedra. So this is one example. Of course, you need to remove the solvent to have a porosity, and then it leads to micro and mesopores and variable surface area that can be in some cases record. You can take almost any metal ion from the periodic table, and there's a large diversity of organic ligands. It can be carboxylate, phosphonate, imidazolate, and so on. Some of them are commercially available. And so as a result, you've got thousands or even dozens of thousands of structures that have been reported in the database. Not all of them are interesting, of course, but it gives, let's say, leads to unprecedented variety of structure compared, let's say, to zeolite, where the number of structure type is more limited. So you can have microporous structures. For instance, here, if you change the metal ion, you form different building units. And you can have also clusters, you can have chains. You can form mesoporous architecture, sometimes even to 5 or 6 or 7 nanometer pore size. You can tune the porosity, the surface of the pores by introduction of functional group on the ligand, but also by direct synthesis or post-synthetic modification. You can also graft, it is not shown here, some organic molecule on Lewis acid site if you have any. And you can have, in some cases, flexible architecture where the porosity is dynamic, means that you can change the pore size, the pore aperture by simply applying a stimuli. You need to overcome an energy barrier here. And the stimuli can be, of course, gas molecules, but also temperature, pressure, even light. There are many possibilities. And this opens, this increases the complexity, of course, of the structure at the end, but it increases the possibility of different application based on this dynamic framework. So very rapidly, how we make MOF? We take a metal source, salt hydroxide, for instance, and ligands, and we solubilize it in an organic solvent. We can add additives, bases, acids, or inhibitors. And often you need to heat, but you can make some MOF at room temperature, or you need tough hydrothermal condition. It really depends on the chemistry of your metal and your ligand. And of course, MOF, you need to, if you want to exploit the porosity, you need to remove what is inside the pores. And it is not as simple as it looks like. With zeolite, you can calcine, and then it's done. Your material is highly thermally stable. With MOF, they are more fragile, less thermally stable. So you need to remove everything that is inside the pores, the solvent, but also sometimes the ligand or some salt. And this is critical. Often people report I've made a MOF by mechanical synthesis with a good yield, but the purity is not the same as the one made by batch. So this is something, yes, very critical for some applications, especially separation. There are many ways of making a MOF that are not hydro or solvothermal condition. You can use solvent-free synthesis with thermomechanical synthesis, or you can combine with an extra source of heating, a different source of heating. Instead of electrical heating, you can use microwave or ultrasound. And more recently, some people developed even some sophisticated routes to produce MOF films, for instance, by chemical vapor deposition. What do you get at the end? You get particles. They can be nano, they can be micron size. And then, of course, you want to solve the structure of this. And you can use all the state-of-the-art techniques that are available, from laboratory single crystal structure down to powder diffraction, and then electron diffraction, can be precession or rotating diffraction. And sometimes this is not enough because the quality of the data is not ideal. So you need to combine with other techniques such as solid-state NMR, pair distribution function. And a good point with MOF, as these are crystalline solid, you can use prediction, either to confirm a structural model or sometimes even to predict ab initio. And then, of course, this can be combined with prediction tools such as creation of database of theoretical MOF and so on. And then if you look at the maturity of the field, of course, zeolite is a mature domain. There are a lot of zeolite that are used in industry for decades. In the case of MOF, initially when they were reported, they were made at the milligram to gram scale. Actually, I would say that some benchmark MOF, maybe 5, 10, or even more of them can be produced at the kilogram to hundreds of kilogram scale. There are a few examples of MOF produced at larger scale by BASF, aluminum MOF. And I would say that in terms of commercialization, there have been several claims of potential for a real application made by startup I would say that in most cases, MOF are, let's say, evaluated currently at the pilot scale from laboratory maybe to intermediate industrial scale. And there's still a way to have a large scale utilization of MOF. We are very far away, I think, still from zeolite, but it's boiling, I would say. And as you can see the number of MOF startups, there are probably 50 of them at least in the world. So it's an indication that the field is becoming more mature. So in terms of the strategy developed in my laboratory in Paris, we are crystallochemists initially. So we are specialized in synthesis and structure solution. It can be simply looking at complex new chemistry that we hardly control, where serendipity is a driving force. To some system where the chemistry is more mature, then we can have a control of the phase. We can use a building unit, preform building unit to make a given material. And then, of course, ourselves or in collaboration, we study their potential application. The most traditional one, of course, is separation, but also it can be related to energy or to health, depending on the type of MOF and the biocompatibility. And for this, I'm not going to talk about this today. We have to shape the material and to scale up to optimize the synthesis in order to fit the requirement for the potential application. So today, because taking into account the audience that is specialized in crystallography, I decided to focus on, let's say, the first stage of the first, let's say, domain of expertise that we rely on in my lab. So it means the crystallochemistry, and especially a system where we are lacking of control of the chemistry. So it means that synthesis of structure of highly challenging systems, such as metal 4 ions that are very reactive. And then once we make this new material, we try to look for a potential application. We are not at a stage where we can already say that from an application, we would like to make this type of material. It's more the other way. Even sometimes in the publication, it is not written like this, where we make new material and then we try to look at some potential application. And I've selected two cases. So one is related to the synthesis of highly stable mesoporous material. And then I will show one example of potential application related to the production of hydrogen. And the other one is related to the production of photoactive material for CO2 transformation. So if you look at the state of the art of mesoporous MOF, this is a schematic representation of the main strategies that have been reported so far. There are basically three main routes. The first one on the left here is to use large ligands and oxo cluster. So these large ligands here is a highly aromatic tetracarboxylate ligand, and you have zirconium-6 oxo cluster. And then as the ligand is very large and the conductivity of the building unit not too high, you form mesopores of a few nanometers. This is efficient to produce a mesoporous solid, but let's say you are still having a good chemical stability because zirconium carboxylate are relatively stable in the presence of humidity. But the ligand is not easy to scale up above a few gram scale and is very expensive. So it means that for some application, it's not a problem if you need a little bit only. And then it's a high value application, but for other application, it's totally irrelevant to consider this material for a real application. Another strategy that was reported before is to use a small building unit still, but then a normal, I would say, simple aromatic carboxylate ligands. And in this case, they form some association like hybrid supertetrahedron. And like zeolite tetrahedra, but instead of having silicon ions, you've got an oxo cluster. And therefore, they associate like a zeolite and they form zeotype architecture. And in this case, despite the fact that you use small ligands, you can have mesopores. Of course, this is advantageous in terms of stability because these short ligands are less prone to bend themselves when you remove the solvent and therefore collapse. When you have very large ligand in MOF chemistry, some cases, when you remove the solvent, the structure collapses. When you use short ligands, the risk is lower. And but here it is made with chromium, so chromium is not safe in terms of toxicity, so it has some side effect. And then the synthesis conditions are quite drastic, so it's difficult to scale up this material. And then more recently, some people reported the use of combination of building units. So here, zirconium-6 and copper building unit. And they could establish, here you see that on the left and the center, you have 6-member ring building units. Here you have 12 building units in the same ring. So it expands the size of the windows and therefore the porosity of the material. So this is quite interesting. The problem is that here you've got two different building units with two different metals. So they have different chemical stability, the copper one being less stable than the zirconium carboxylate one. So the stability is questionable here. And then it is always more difficult to scale up a bimetallic system than a more metallic one, because you need, if you change the scale of the reaction, it is known that even for a single metal, you need to optimize the condition. But when you want to scale up an heterometallic system, the chemistry you need, the adjustment of the chemistry of the two is even more complicated. So it means that at the end, there's not much satisfaction in terms of mesoporous MOF. They don't fulfill all the criteria required for real application. And of course, why do we need mesoporous material? Maybe it's a naive response, but of course, if you want to deal with large gas molecules, for instance, the cRNA encapsulation, or if you want to introduce some inorganic nanometer size nanoparticle for catalysis. And then when you want to design this mesoporous material, the stability issues, that is already a parameter that is critical when you make a microporous MOF, becomes even more critical when you have this mesoporous material. So the durability, the stability under operation is even more critical. So recently, we reported the synthesis, a new way of making mesoporous MOF. It is called homometallic multicluster dots strategy, HMD. And in this case, instead of having two different building units made from two different metals, we use the same metal, but with two different building units. Here, this is based on zirconium-6 and zirconium-12 cluster. We use solvothermal conditions, so formic acid, and we use a very simple bio-derived isophthalic acid, 1,3-benzene dicarboxylic acid, and we obtain this solid. So the structure was solved with protein beamline with a macrofocus beam at the PX2 beamline at Soleil near Paris. And then, because the quality of the data was not so good, we had to, colleagues refine the structure by DFT, and then it was further validated by high resolution color diffraction. And so this material is as a 2D structure. Here, it's an hexagonal structure. So, and it is delimited by 6 ZR6 cluster and 3 ZR12 cluster connected through the isophthalic. So it forms a nice 9-member ring. And therefore, the pore size estimated by the precise structure and the pore size distribution by nitrogen porosimetry is about near 2.6 nanometers. So it lies in the mesoporous range. This structure, we of course use additional technique to confirm it. So we tried two techniques in our lab. One of them was pair distribution function analysis, but it was a little bit puzzling because the signature of ZR6 and a ZR12 cluster is almost the same. Because if you look at the ZR12 cluster, it is basically two ZR6 clusters that are connected by mu2 OH groups. So it does not give rise to significantly different PDF signature. So another technique that we decided to apply in collaboration with a group specialized in DNP NMR, so dynamic nuclear polarization NMR at ENS in Paris, was to load this mesoporous channel with some radicals. So radical that will transfer the polarization to the new NMR nucleus. And we wanted to look specifically at the oxygen NMR. So oxygen NMR, as you know, only the 17 oxygen nucleus is sensitive, and it has a very, very low natural abundance of less than 0.04%. So typically, people, they enrich during the synthesis or post-synthetically a material to introduce this, to enrich with 17 oxygen. The problem is that in a MOF oxocluster with the ligand, you have a lot of different oxygens that have a very different exchanging ability. It's relatively easy to exchange an oxygen from a terminal water molecule, but it's very hard to exchange it from the oxygen from the carboxylate from the ligand. And so here, They use the DNP to increase by 28 factor the NMR signal in order to collect in 48 hours the signature of the 17 oxygen of the material without any enrichment. And you can see here, this is a signature of all the oxygen site, and it was validated by calculation, and they could identify clearly the one of the two oxo cluster, especially this mu2OH from the ZR12 cluster. And they calculated the saving in experimental time to be of 800, so that was very, very high. So it confirmed the structural model from the other technique, especially the crystal structure. So this material, our objective was to also have something relatively chemically stable for its utilization. So we verified this by traditional test in solution. So you can see on the left the XRD pattern in a different condition, reflux, strongly acidic or strongly basic condition of pH 12. There was no degradation of the MOF. We validated this by ACM and also by BET surface BET measurement. We have only observed a little bit of defect when we use aqua regia, which is very, very acidic. And then in collaboration with some teams, especially in Mexico, but also in Korea, we also checked the stability of the material in the presence of corrosive gases, such as SO2 here and H2S at the top. And you could see that after 5 cycles of adsorption desorption, there was no modification of the sorption capacity of the material. Also, another point for some application is the thermal stability. So this MOF is a complex material with ZR12, ZR6 clusters, and then also it's a 2D structure. Sometimes 2D structures are less stable than 3D. And here, this is a variable temperature PXRD, and you can see that up to 300 degrees C, we can keep the structural integrity of the material. At 300, we see a beginning of peak broadening, but this is also known in ZR6-based MOF that you have some dealloxylation at such temperature. And based on TGA, we are really convinced that it is more a loss of long-range order rather than a real degradation of the structure. As a whole, from the liquid, the gas, and the thermal stability assessment, we can say that this type of material possesses at least a very good stability that is interesting for application. Another interesting feature of these phases is that the functional groups, so in the 5th position of the isophthalic the benzene ring, points at the center of the mesopores. And you can see that we could obtain by direct synthesis a lot of variants of functionalized isophthalic group that are all commercially available. And only in a few cases, we could not obtain the pure MOF by direct synthesis for some unknown reasons. And we could still introduce this ligand as a secondary ligand by using one of the, for instance, the pure isophthalic compounds. So using what is called a multivariate strategy, which consists in combining 2 different with the same geometry, but the different functional group within the same solid. So it means that we can tune the surface of the pores of this MOF with all these functional groups. And as an example, here you see the water sorption isotherm on the left. You see that if you introduce a bromo OH group, you can shift the water sorption isotherms quite significantly, which means that at the end, we have really a possibility to have mesoporous MOF with a very significantly different surface chemistry. And this is a result that was not been published yet. We also recently obtained another example of this HMD strategy. In the published result, we obtained the 6+3, let's say, clusters. So 3 ZR12, 6 ZR6 cluster by using isophthalic acid. And we realized that when we use some very bulky functional group like a terbutyl, we obtain this structure where we have 12 clusters instead of 9. So 6 ZR6, 6 ZR12. And as a consequence, despite the steric hindrance of the butyl group here, we increase by almost 1 nanometer the pore size, and we almost double the pore volume of the sample. So we don't have any rationale on this yet. This is still serendipity driven. But let's say that this combination of ZR6 and ZR12 cluster offers a new possibility in MOF chemistry, not only mesoporous solid, but also in zirconium MOF chemistry, build a new architecture. So this is really something interesting for the future of this type of crystallochemistry. Of course, these materials are 2D. So at that time when we made this sample, we were wondering if this could be exfoliated, but we had no time to do that. And our colleague from Kiel, Norbert Stock, reported almost this in parallel to our paper. The similar structure, but with an amide functional group. It's not presented here, but it's an amide group. Because this is a single layer of the mesoporous MOF, and as you can see on the bottom left, this is a double layer, and these layers, they nicely pack. So this is fortunate because they could pack the center, and then you will have a much lower porosity. And they try in collaboration with a group in Heidelberg to exfoliate by liquid phase exfoliation using different parameters, sonication, ultrasonification. And they could not go yet to the nanosheets. They could go to only to 60 to 150 nanometer thickness as a proof of concept that this material could be at least exfoliated. They say the same as clays. But of course, you know, 2D material is a very hot topic in material science, not only for graphene or MOS2, but also for MOF, conductive MOF, and so on, or even more for 2D MOF for separation or catalysis. And these conditions are very harsh, and there's need to develop some software condition to obtain the single sheets, but there are interfacial techniques that probably will allow someone to do that in the near future. So with this mesoporous platform, we are looking for different potential application, and we discussed with Sang-Chu from Osaka, especially of heterogeneous catalysis, and then you had the idea to look at the formic acid reduction with these mesoporous solids. Because formic acid, as you might know, is one of the safest hydrogen storage carrier solution because it can be easily transported at room temperature. The thing is that you need to transform it back to hydrogen if you want to utilize it. And then the state-of-the-art catalysis are palladium nanoparticles that are usually immobilized in mesoporous solid. But as the conditions are quite harsh, it's in water, 60 degrees Celsius, you need formic acid, formate. Then there's a lot of deactivation issues and degradation issues with the mesoporous solid. So what they did is they took our solids and they loaded it with palladium nanoparticle using sodium borohydride at 0 degrees Celsius. And you can see here on this figure here that we have the nanoparticle of a few nanometers in the MOF particles that are bigger of a few hundred nanometers. And they compare it with benchmark MOF like PCN224 or NU1000 or Mi11 chromium, and then a commercial mesoporous carbon. And they could see that under the condition tested, our material with the OH functional group behaved the best. And not only that, but they could recycle it during 5 times. So it was shown that this MOF was totally reusable despite the fact that they use harsh conditions. As we could vary the nature of the functional group on this solid, of course, it was natural to look at the consequence in terms of catalytic activity. But first of all, we were interested to see where are the palladium nanoparticles. If you take the bare MOF, clearly, if you look at the particle size distribution from TM, we can say that they are probably at the outer surface of the particle or localized in defect inside the crystal because the particle size is much larger than the one of the pore size of the MOF. If you look OH, if you use an OH functionalized group here, then the particle size is more narrow, and then it focuses around 2 to 3 nanometers. So it means that part of the nanoparticle could be inside the pore and the rest outside. And what is nice also is that after the catalytic reaction, after the reduction of formic acid into hydrogen, you see that there's almost no change in the particle size distribution. So it means that there's a little sintering occurring during the catalytic reaction. But let's say that the first conclusion here is that with the traditional standard functional group, it is hard to control the particle size distribution of palladium inside the pores of the MOF. So what we did is we used, through the multivariate approach, we substituted part of the azeoxylic acid by a parazole dicarboxylic acid. So where the parazole is free, it's not attached to the zirconium. So it's pending, pointing at the pore, center of the pore. And it is known that palladium likes parazole. And thus, when you load the palladium salt before the sodium hydride reduction, there's a good chance that the palladium salt is attached to the parazole. And then when you reduce, for the palladium nanoparticle, it stays attached there. And that's exactly what happened, because you see that the particle size distribution when you use the Parasol functionalized material, it fits perfectly with the pore size of the MOF, around 2 nanometer in size. So it is really inside the pores of the material. And you see in terms of catalytic activity, it has even a higher activity than the OH functionalized material, probably because you have better accessibility and better confinement of the species inside the pores. So this is a nice example of engineering functionalization to optimize the catalytic performance of a mesoporous solid. So as a conclusion, now we are in this stage of let's say, in the field of mesoporous MOF. I think we have introduced a new method to produce some stable and cheap and easy mesoporous MOF using this homometallic multi-building block strategy. This is one example here, but I've shown you that we have another example. Of course, we still need to develop more rationale on this. I know there are some studies, for instance, reported by WinBuilding, where they can characterize the building unit in solution by mass spectrometry. Still, this is not exactly a way to completely control the formation of these different building units and associate them. Now, I will talk about another showcase that concerns the development of microporous photoactive MOF. And first, let's say exploitation in photocatalysis. So this is a short summary of the state of the art of, let's say, photocatalysis, I would say in general, water splitting, but it could be applied also for CO2 reduction. So this is under radiation, you separate charge in a solid. Of course, they can recombinate at the surface of the particle or inside the bulk. You want to avoid that. So you need to have a certain lifetime of the separated charge. And then the idea is to combine often with a co-catalyst that either will accept the positive charge or the electron in order to produce hydrogen or oxygen. And then the target, especially for hydrogen, are quite tough. You want to have 5 to 10 solar efficiency, and you want to very low cost for hydrogen. And you need to compete with techniques that are maybe not good for the planet, but that works better and are cheaper, like the dehydrogenation of methane, or alternatively, some from electrocatalysis that works very well in terms of yield, but then that requires a lot of energy compared to what is gained from the production of hydrogen. Usually in photocatalysis, especially for hydrogen, they use sacrificial agents, so electron donor, like an alcohol or an amine. This is called hydrogen evolution. But the best case will be overall water splitting, where you can do both hydrogen and oxygen evolution. And in the field of porous solid, this is rare that you can rely on a single MOF. You need to have usually a co-catalyst, or at least 2 metals in the same structure to have overall water splitting. And for instance, if you look at perovskite, they usually the best material are perovskite so far, and they rely on, of course, perovskite, but the addition of noble metal, and of course, this has some limitation in terms of cost and scalability. If you look in the field of MOF, so this is a recent study by, I think, Sergio Navalón from ITQ in Spain. This is using the state-of-the-art benchmark MOF B125 and its amino functionalization, and they consider 2 sacrificial agents. So this is hydrogen evolution, so triethanolamine and methanol. And you see that, of course, it changes the productivity. It works much better with methanol than triethanolamine. But what you can see also is that this is not a linear production of hydrogen. There is a kind of deactivation or change in slope that is questionable here. What they showed is that there's a little CO2 regeneration compared to hydrogen, so this is quite selective. But still, when people discovered the first titanium porous MOF at the end of the 2000s, there was a great hope that this MOF could be very interesting for photocatalysis and especially hydrogen production. And now this is a bit disappointing. There's some limited performances and there's some deactivation. And people try different strategies to improve that, such as ligand engineering or combination with co-catalyst. But still, this is not yet meeting the expectation that were raised before. In our case, a few years ago, we reported titanium carboxylate MOF that was photoconductive because you have these infinite titanium oxide nanorods as a building unit. So this was demonstrated by TRMC, where you have a lifetime of the separated charge that is evidence for a few microseconds. And while if you take also cluster-based MOF, there's almost no charge separation. And then what we did, we decided to use these titanium oxide nanorods to dope it with different metals in order to tune the catalytic properties. For instance, transition metal like iron, but also ruthenium. And I will show you one example with the doping with ruthenium that we carry out in collaboration with Jorge Gascon, now that is in KAUST. When you introduce up to 5% or 6% of ruthenium in the sample, of course, the band gap decreases. You start to see a solid that is colored. And you see by TGA that thermal stability decreases, probably because the ruthenium oxide is a +3, +4 here. Start to be an oxidant and to degrade the ligand of the MOF itself when you heat too much. And to be sure that the ruthenium was inside let's say the framework and not extra framework, we carry out several characterization techniques such as EXAF, for instance, and also differential PDF analysis that was done in collaboration with Ana Platero from Madrid. And you can see here that they observe ruthenium oxygen distances that are exactly the one that are expected from the crystal structure, in addition to ruthenium distances that are also similar to the one we have in the crystal structure. So all the techniques go in favor of the ruthenium being inside the framework and not outside the framework. And now for hydrogen evolution, this material were tested. So with the different amount of ruthenium and in comparison, both with the bare titanium chain-based MOF and also the benchmark E125 amino. And you can see here that first of all, it was quite disappointing that the pure titanium MOF was not, although we were irradiated under the UV, was less active than the E125 amino. So it was a little bit counterintuitive, but we realized that we know that photocatalysis depends on multiple parameters. This is not only related to conductivity. And but when we increase the ruthenium content, we could see, let's say, a 10 or 15 time increase in the performance when we reach 0.8%. And then after, when we increase too much ruthenium content, it was further decreasing. We don't know yet exactly why we have this optimal behavior. We thought initially it was an effect of dilution because the more ruthenium you have, the more it absorbs light and then maybe it does not penetrate all the crystal, but we tried dilution, it does not change the behavior. So this is something else. Anyway, we have seen that what is interesting out of the performance in terms of capacity, that there's no deactivation observed. If you take E125, you see that there's a deactivation, probably because you use an amine that gives a slightly basic pH, and then this MOF is less stable than our MOF. And then we could recycle it 5 times, so no deactivation, it is really stable with time. Actually, what they are doing is try it with methanol instead of triethanolamine, because it's supposedly, according to the paper published by the Spanish group, should behave much better. But still, we are hydrogen evolution, and we are still far away from the noble metal, let's say from the metal oxide composite. So there's still a lot of room of improvement for that. So we continue, we have continuously an effort to develop new titanium MOF. So we have several in the lab. I will show you some that we have published recently. And one of them is a 2D isophthalate MOF that we reported in 2019. So why 2D MOF could be interesting? There's an article from Dan Sao, Singapore, that shows that if you change your aspect ratio from, let's say, bulk zirconium MOF to nanosheets of zirconium MOF, you can strongly enhance the hydrogen production performance. Here, when we reported this solid, we were first very happy because instead of relying only on serendipity to make this titanium MOF, because in the literature, if you look at the 2530 titanium carboxylate MOF reported so far, they are almost built up from different building units. So there's no predictability in the field. Here we could obtain the titanium formate oxocluster, which is the TA808 oxocluster. And then we could either by direct synthesis or by simply exchange with trimesic acid produce to keep the building unit during the synthesis and to produce this 2D material where the cluster are bridged in the plane by the four ligands. And at the top and the bottom of the building unit, you have acetate or formate that finish the coordination. So this phase is microporous and has open metal site, and it can be exfoliated. You can see these nice TM images that we collected recently after application. So this is interesting probably for many applications where 2D material are of interest. But also we tried the typical strategies of a multivariate ligand mixture during the synthesis. And we could obtain a significant replacement of the trimesic acid by different derivatives of isophthalic acid and also some 5-membrane heterometallic ligand. And it has some consequences in terms of CO2 capture. You can tune the capacity and the selectivity. But unfortunately, when our colleague from ITQ tried the photocatalytic property of this MOF, it will be unstable and with a lot of gas emission. And their interpretation and ours is that this material suffers from a too high reactivity because of this terminal acetate in a large number, which make the building unit too reactive, in fact, and therefore not stable enough under the condition. In parallel, in the same system, but just changing the ligand going to the amino isophthalic acid, we could obtain this other structure. This time it's not an oxocluster, it's a chain-based material with corner sharing, cis-sharing chains of titanium octahedra. And this form a 3D solid with channels of a few angstrom per size. It is associated to the aluminum coated material. And what is noteworthy is that the NH2 initial group is transformed to an in situ amidation because we use formic acid or acetic acid mixture to make the material. So we form a microporous 3D MOF that is also hydrophobic because you don't have any more OH group in the chain because you have a PI4 oxo chain in this case. And this material, of course, you can change also by different isophthalic group up to 50% in some cases, and it changes the CO2 capacity. So this can be interesting for separation, but here this was not our main focus. We are also interested to test the stability of this material, and it was surprisingly stable, even more stable than our best MOF reported so far. Even in boiling water, we did not see a change of porosity, a change in particular size and shape and anything. And it was also more stable under basic condition than, for instance, B125 and so on. As expected, the thermal stability was relatively good because chain-based material are relatively more stable than cluster-based material. And it was stable up to more than 300 degrees C. And initial tests, this time not for hydrogen evolution, but overall water splitting were quite promising. We have also around 100 micromole without any optimization in 24 hours. But our colleagues observed some CO2 evolution. And that is why they did not pursue in this direction, and they decided to focus on another application, which is CO2 photometallization. As you know, the treatment, the valorization of CO2 is something critical. And one way is to use lost hydrogen produced in industry and to couple that with CO2 and to form methane. It involves 8 electrons, and it is quite a demanding reaction. Of course, CO2 is hard to reduce. And there are several ways. I'll summarize it. You can use high temperature noble metal base oxide or MOF. So it is traditional catalysis. You can use photocatalysis with oxide or graphene oxide or MOF. there are some good performances with, for instance, perovskite or copper cluster on RGO, but they work only on UV visible range. In the field of MOF, there were some reports using some copper and zinc MOF at 250, but the yield was relatively low. It worked under visible range, low temperature, but with a low yield. So there's still a need to have material that works well under visible light, lower temperature with a good yield. And so this material, as it has possessed chains, one question was, is it photoactive? One way to do that is to do the so-called photodeposition method, where you have formation of the inorganic nanoparticle at where the charge go, the positive or the negative charge. So what they did is they did that with a reduction of ruthenium salt, and they evidenced that very small nanoparticles of less than 2 nanometers were formed at the surface of the MOF. And for them, it was a clear evidence that there was some photocharge separation in this MOF around irradiation. Then they could, this is why they could deposit this small nanoparticle at specific places of the MOF particle. Of course, this was not only done to demonstrate that this material was photoactive, but also it was to improve the performance for, let's say, photo methanation of CO2. So the material was shown to be stable also after this reduction. And what they did is they tried under visible light, 200 degrees C, 1 bar of halogen, 0.25 bar of CO2, the photomethanation of CO2 with the pure MOF. So far, there was no report that a pure MOF could be active for such a reaction. And in this case, the yield was not exceptional, but was the first evidence that the pure MOF could be active for such a demanding reaction. Of course, not as high as the composite with oxide or RGO. And then to enhance the performance, they introduced this ruthenium oxide nanoparticles that I've shown you before, and then they could see a 20-fold enhancement of the performance. So of course, this is still 5 to 10 times lower than the noble metal perovskite-based composite, but here it works under visible range, and there's no rhodium in the composite. And also one interesting hypothesis is, because you have a porous solid here, the MOF is porous, is that the selectivity is something very important in CO2 reduction. You want to reduce CO2 and to produce methane, but you don't want a side product like CO. And the hypothesis is that CO was absorbed in the pores, which enhanced the selectivity towards methane. The material was stable during 7 consecutive cycles and with no evidence of degradation by XRD or by solid-state NMR on the ligand after 7 cycles. So this is very important. And to better understand the mechanism, they did some additional experiments. First, if you don't have any irradiation, you decrease by 10 the production of methane. If you use water here in blue, that poisoned let's say the catalyst, you don't have any activity. If you use electron quencher like nitrobenzene, then you don't have any activity as well. And then this is a mistake, it's anisole, not dimethylamine. If you use electron donor, but that has a high potential, like anisole, then in this case, it is known that the higher is the potential, the less efficient is the reaction. You see that you decrease strongly the reaction. In addition, they didn't see any thermal effect based on carbon dot photoluminescence, but it was heavily evidence that this is not a thermal transformation, but a photo-induced charge separation driven reduction of CO2 into methane. Of course, there's still a need to improve a lot the performance. So that's it. I would like to thank my colleague that helped me to do this work, so especially Sujing Wang, who is now a professor in China, Antoine Tissot and Yuri, Dov Galiuk for the structure solution, my colleagues from NMR in Paris or in Versailles, especially Guillaume Morin for the modeling of the structure, the beamline PX2 at Soleil, and then my Spanish colleague Ana Platero, Sergio, and Hermé, an Asian colleague for some catalytic absorption tests, and Yves Barrera for the H2S test. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Christian, for the talk. It's really fascinating how many things we can make with MOFs inside the pores. It's just so much chemistry. to be down. So we have time now for a few questions. You can start to send your questions through the question and answer window or just the chat. And then we can start reading them.
Yeah, there's I didn't. Okay, I'm just looking.
Okay, so I can go and read out loud. If thank you so much, Christian, from Sergio Carrasco. In the first work you showed, I'd like to know if you have evaluated somehow the palladium leaching.
They tested only 5 cycles, so they didn't see any change of activity, but I don't think they look carefully at they look at the particle size distribution from TM, but I don't know. I think they look in solution, but it was not done maybe accurately. There's a little bit of sintering when you don't use any parasol, for sure, because you see that although it stays more or less around the same particle size distribution, it tends to a little bit change. But as you know, estimating particle size, small nanoparticle from TM is depends where you're looking at. So it is not an absolute determination. But yes, it's likely that if you don't use any parasol functionalization, there's a little bit of leaching, at least the particles that are at the outer surface.
Right. Okay. I got also a question regarding this exfoliation or MIP 206, right? The zirconium, mesoporous zirconium moth. So what is the interaction between the layers? Or those, I guess it's hydrogen bonds.
Yes, there's a combination of interaction. There's not much pi-pi stacking because the ligand is short and the big units are big. Of course, there are some formates. Sometimes OH is not so easy to know if they are formate or OH. I suppose that if it's formate, interaction is weaker than if it's OH. But certainly these are heavy layers. I suppose that the energy of interaction is much larger than, for instance, the titanium 2D MOF I've shown. But we don't have any calculation of the strength of interaction of this. We know that there's a good packing, so it's indication also that there's a good interaction. Otherwise, between two layers, there won't be any. The porosity is a channel 1, so it means that's a perfect packing of 2 consecutive layers. Right. And this is fortunate for the porosity. This is not good sign for the exfoliation, I suppose.
Yeah. I can imagine.
But there are
just, yeah. No, I was just thinking that whether there is any effect, for example, if you change the functionality of the ligand, could that also affect?
Yeah, you're correct. If you with the terbityl group, I suppose it will be easier in some organic solvent to exfoliate. But we did not try to look at that exfoliation. We are not specialists of 2D materials as well. I think it's a know-how. We only tried recently with some conductive MOF, and it works quite well to exfoliate a few layers, but the interaction are probably weaker. Yes, the condition they use with Norbert Stock are very drastic. So I hope some people can find an easier method to do that.
To do that, I know. We have another question from Javi Castel. Thank you so much, Christian, for the lovely talk. I wanted to ask you, which are, in your opinion, the main synthetic factor controlling the formation of discrete clusters or 1D titanium oxo chains when using the amino functionalized linker, IPA amino?
Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that these, when you change the ligand, you can still find condition where you form the phase with cluster or chains. It's only that you do not lead to crystalline material in any case. And that's, so because for instance, we use the amino material, we see condition where we have humps, that should correspond to the 2D material, but it's badly crystalline, and so we do not report that usually in a paper. You don't report the badly crystalline material. And the same for the other ligands, we see sometimes some hump, the position of the chain phase. But again, we cannot really demonstrate, it will be very complicated to demonstrate that it is the same phase. So it's more related to the nucleation growth of these phases rather than not making one phase or another one. And then in this case, how the functional group impacts the nucleation growth. Of course, solubility has always been demonstrated to be a critical parameter, but it is not only that. You have sometimes the protonation state of a basic group. If you work under acidic condition, you know, with UIU66, the amino one always react differently than the others because you have this partial protonation. In addition, here you have this amidation. So I know that Norbert Stock, for instance, the mesoporous zirconium MOF, he has obtained it in pure acetic acid. We obtain our MOF in pure formic acid. But in this case, he obtained the amide version, you know. So how does it impact the crystallization? Because these amide bonds, maybe at boiling condition, under solvothermal condition, it makes and it is broken all the time, and then it plays some extent on the let's say the bond breaking that allows the crystallization. I don't know. It has been shown for DMF and carboxylic acid that the formation of amide plays a great role in the crystallization. Maybe this is a reason why there's a difference between this amide and the rest of the functional group. This is my hypothesis.
Yeah, that's very interesting. If anybody wants to make a question, by the way, while just talking, also can use the raise your hand option in Zoom, and then Fernando can also open your microphone. In the meantime, really following with this discussion on titanium, yeah, I just wanted also to know a little bit your opinion on this, because so there are titanium MOFs are really getting a lot of attention for these applications, and that the synthesis is facing so many challenges, as you were, some of them you were just describing. And could you comment a little bit on what you think is the more critical step really that you need to take into consideration to get the titanium MOF? So you were mentioning, for example, the crystallization competition with other phases. Is that something that is common?
In fact, this is true and not true that this is difficult to make titanium MOF, because this is not like chromium. Chromium, you need to go to very high temperature, because chromium 3 is not really, it's a very inert cation, and you need to force the lability of the bond. So you need to go to 180, 200, sometimes HF, and so on. So this is really a limitation in terms of scale up. But you can form relatively large amount of chromium carboxylate material. In the case of titanium, it's more like it's 1 or 0. If you make it, sometimes you can find conditions. It's not too difficult to form it under softer conditions, like reflux. Many of our titanium MOF, we can make it MIL-125, the chain phase, we can all make them under reflux. It's just why you can make with this ligand and not this ligand, and why do you form this structure and not this structure? So you have a total lack of predictability. And of course, you cannot grow it as big crystals like with aluminum or even zirconium. So it's less flexible in terms of chemistry. If you want just to change the functional group, MIL-125, nobody knows why it does not work with CH3, for instance. Probably hundreds of groups have tried and no one has succeeded. So this is probably the main limitation, to find all the chemical clues. Of course, there are ways to sort this out. For instance, Carlos Gastaldi, he has made this heterometallic with calcium and titanium. This is one way. There are also other people that use titanium and zinc in the past. Maybe or zirconium and titanium by Onkaitsu. But it is not pure titanium. There's something going on that makes the crystallization easier when you have this second metal. But yes, this is very challenging for the crystal chemists, and I would say that probably is one of the domain in chemistry, MOF chemistry, where there's still a need of understanding. to do some in situ, to do calculation, to yes.
Right. Yeah. That's really a point that I'm also wanting to point out that the need of multi-technique characterization that you have shown these examples, really nice example, really with the solid state NMR with the oxygens, how for the full characterization, and also from the crystallographic point of view, just to finish. You mentioned also the use of electron diffraction.
Yes.
I have the feeling that it's going to be more widely used in the future, I guess, for solving structures of MOFs. And do you have any comment on that, for example, regarding how to get the measurement down, for example, the need of cryogenic TM, or is that common also for this type of materials?
Yes, this is a good point. When the people started to use electron diffraction for MOFs, so there was two groups, basically Utokolb in Mainz and then Zhou in Stockholm. And then it was limited because they had a limited amount of time to look at many compounds coming from everywhere in the world. And then also, according to discussion with them, is the level of the student also, because you need to try a lot. Now, I think the techniques are getting more popular. There are people doing that in China, in Europe, in the US. And of course, the equipment is there. And of course, you need to find the engineer or someone that has the expertise, because when you come to these people, they say they are used to work with oxide or zeolite, and they are not very happy to see how fast a MOF breaks.
Yeah.
But as you know, there are limitations. You can have a nice small nanoparticle, but then there's no diffraction at high angle, or the cell is too large. I would say that it adds another technique to the wide range of technique that we already have, from single crystal to powder diffraction, and of course modeling. It's not going to be the only technique because the accessibility to this technique will still be more limited than a single crystal in your lab. And still, even if you get your model by electron diffraction, you still need the other techniques to validate. And then now you have serial crystallography that comes even with small crystals. I think it's coming with electron also diffraction. And yes, certainly the time needed to solve a structure of a new MOF would be shorter than before. If it's your conclusion, yes. But it should not be the only technique. You need to rely also on solid state NMR, on modeling, on and all the physical-chemical characterization. But certainly it's a great progress that more and more people have devoted time and equipment for these fragile materials. Yes, for sure.
Yeah, fully agree. Thank you very much. I mean, you have this really broad vision when dealing with these materials, so this is really helpful, I think, for anyone who's working with these materials and facing these so many challenges in characterization. Anybody else have any other questions in the audience? It's now time to raise your hand or ask. Otherwise, I'd like to thank you, Christian, again for the talk. Fantastic talk, and thank you very much again for being here. It's been a really a pleasure, and thank you to everybody in the audience to be here. I already typed it in the chat, but I also want to remind that if some student in the audience needs a certificate of attendance to the seminars for the PhD program, for example, they can easily get it from the organizer. Just send us a message, and then we will send it to you. Otherwise, I think Fernando and Pilar, we can conclude the talk and conclude this session. And thank you again, Christian. It's really
thank you very much, Felipe, and I hope we can see each other face to face in the near future as well. It will be
hopefully
a good thing.
Yeah.
So,
okay. All right. So thank you very much, everyone.
Bye bye.
You too. Thank you.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Thank you.